The issues facing the European Union. This video is a collection of issues facing the European Union and which parties have the most and least support for them. Common security policy. Ever since the Lisbon Treaty, the EU members have become more united on issues of security. However, critics have pointed to the Ukraine crisis as a sign of weakness in the EU security policies. Some parties are in favour of closer union in terms of security, with agreed upon contingency plans for superseding sovereignty to better respond to issues developing on EU borders. Those against argue it's another chip away at sovereignty. Many EU citizens don't like thinking of the EU as or ever becoming a military power, and the last big issue is neutrality. Even though 4 EU nations claim to be neutral, only Ireland has a military non-participation amendment on the Solidarity Clause, which means an attack on one EU nation is an attack on all. But there are fears that a hypothetical military aggressor might not acknowledge nation neutrality when at war with the European Union. If in favour for this, then a vote to Socialists and Democrats, Allied Liberal Democrats of Europe, or the European People's Party would be the way to go. If against, then a vote for the European United Left or Nordic Green Left. Fortress Europe. Fortress Europe is the idea that Europe should become stricter on immigration both within the European Union and on immigration coming from neighbouring regions. External immigration tends to affect Italy and Spain the most, but due to the free movement of labour in the EU, it's seen as an EU-wide issue if there is an increased number of illegal immigrants coming into Europe. Some people and parties also wish to remove the border-free area in mainland Europe known as the Schengen area, arguing it increases illegal immigrant and criminal mobility. Those who argue against Fortress Europe believe it would undo a lot of the benefits of being an EU citizen, as well as the benefits of doing business in the EU, such as easy trade and mobility. Some also believe that closing the external borders and not allowing immigrants goes against the EU's principles of protecting ethnic minorities and refugees. If you are for the idea of Fortress Europe, a vote for the European People's Party is recommended. EFD is more in favour of this, but they have no representatives in Ireland. If you are against Fortress Europe, then a vote for any other party would do it. All other parties feel pretty strongly this is not a good idea, with European United Left and the Greens being the most opposed. Federal Europe. A federal Europe, the idea that the EU should act more as one nation and less as a coalition of nations, is one that has been debated for a while. The arguments for it are varied. The first is international competition. The argument goes that with the US, China and Russia, along with growing powers such as Brazil and India dominating the global stage, Europe would need to federalize in order to compete. Another argument for it is the euro crisis. Many believe that Brussels needs better control over EU states' financial situation to better avoid another euro crisis, and this control would come with a federal system. The last argument is, my government might improve by learning from those guys. Some nations have lost faith in their national government and have looked to the EU or other EU member states in hopes that a closer union might bring those styles of government to them. The arguments against include the threat to sovereignty and the idea that such a mix of cultures and languages could never work as a cohesive government or nation. The last argument is reverse of the previous last argument, that my government might get influenced by aspects of other EU states they find less appealing. If you are for this idea, Socialists and Democrats are the most in favour of the idea. However, the presidential candidate for Allied Liberal Democrats of Europe, Guy Verhofstadt, literally wrote the book on federal Europe. If against, a vote for the European United Left and Nordic Green Left is my recommendation. Energy Union. In light of the Ukraine crisis, many politicians in Central, North and Eastern Europe have concluded that Russia is no longer a stable source of energy, and therefore they wish to create an energy union of sorts that would result in a more self-sufficient EU in terms of energy. Many have seen this as an opportunity to push clean, renewable energy, which both Denmark and Sweden have been making great strides in recently. The argument against is that a union might further reduce relationships between the EU and Russia, that such a transition would be difficult and expensive, and finally, an energy union could not dictate an effective energy plan for all EU states, namely Ireland, which does not get its supply of natural gas from Russia. In favour of this is the Greens, and against the idea is the European People's Party. LGBTQ rights. This is an issue that most of you are aware of, but the issue takes a slightly different form in the European Union, since the European Union contains some of the most tolerant and simultaneously most intolerant countries in the developed world. The arguments for LGBTQ rights are as follows. The protection of minorities is a part of EU principles that many believe should extend to sexual minorities, which it currently does not. Some believe that a European-wide ruling on LGBTQ rights might come before a nation does it. Ignoring hate-filled arguments, because there is a couple of them, The arguments against include the idea that this is for a nation to decide, and that the EU has no place deciding this for every nation. The other argument against it is that Europe simply isn't ready. While within the EU some of the most tolerant nations exist, such as the UK, Belgium and the Netherlands, it also contains countries with poor LGBTQ rights, such as Latvia, Lithuania and Italy. Although it is worth mentioning that being within the EU improves national LGBTQ rights, such as Malta, which has improved its laws and policies since joining, and Latvia and Lithuania, which have improved significantly when compared to surrounding Russia and Belarus. If in favour of LGBTQ rights on a European level, then a vote for the Greens, Socialists and Democrats, Allied Liberal Democrats of Europe, or United European Left and Nordic Green Left is recommended. And within the parties that Ireland can vote for, the European People's Party has the least support for EU-wide LGBTQ rights. Turkish accession and expansion. So in 2004, 10 nations entered into the EU, and 3 other nations entered after that, and there is no sign of stopping further expansion soon. Iceland, Macedonia, Montenegro and Serbia are all candidates working towards full membership, and association agreements have been recently signed with Ukraine and Moldova, who have all powerful parties working towards joining. Some EU parties are glad welcoming more countries into the fold. Some feel that expansion should stop or slow down to allow the economy to adjust. However, there is one candidate that is in the process of becoming a full member that has been applying to join since 1987, that is Turkey. Turkish accession has proven to be a divisive topic in EU Parliament, with arguments on both sides. The for Turkish accession argument goes as follows. The Turkish people want it. Many of the recent riots in Istanbul and Ankara have been over principles that Europeans admire, including less police brutality, women's rights, free speech and less government corruption. And people believe that these situations would improve if they were in the EU. The economy in Turkey is currently booming and economically would be a welcome member. Also, letting Turkey into the EU might also lead to real peace in Cyprus. The arguments against letting Turkey in have usually been, sadly and unfairly, against Islam. If Turkey were to join, they would be the only Muslim nation in an otherwise Christian continent, even though strong native Muslim populations exist all across the EU. Fair arguments have been against the current Turkish administration, who has fought protests with severity, controlled national media, and blocked both YouTube and Twitter to stifle free speech. Other politicians believe that Turkey should change socially before entering the EU, rather than letting them join and allowing EU influences to take effect. If you believe in Turkish accession now, then a vote for Greens, Socialists and Democrats, and European United Left or Nordic Green Left is my recommendation. If you believe in more changes in Turkey but for membership not to be taken off the table, a vote for Allied Liberal Democrats of Europe. And if you are opposed to Turkish accession, then a vote for the European People's Party is in order. I hope this has successfully outlined European Union issues, as I have found many Irish MEP candidates have not mentioned their stance on a lot of these issues, even though they might potentially vote on any number of bills about this over the next 5 years.